What you believe about our history is about to be shattered. One mysterious event connects over 600 ancient global cultures. Tonight we reveal forbidden evidence that has been suppressed for decades. It points to a lost civilization from over 12,000 years ago. The truth of what happened is more shocking than any myth. Stay until the end to learn the incredible warning for our future. In the red dust of Australia, elders share a story of a world-consuming flood. They speak of ancestors scrambling to high peaks as the dark waters devoured land. Only a handful survived to carry the ancient memory of this saga forward. Journey across the planet to Mesopotamia, the very cradle of ancient civilization. 5,000 years ago, scribes pressed a tale of a coming deluge into clay. A man named Utnapishtim was forewarned by the gods to construct a great vessel. He saved his family, and every beast before the world was scoured completely clean. Now cross the ocean to South America, where the Inca tell the same story. Their creator god, Viracocha, sent a flood that completely annihilated the entire world. Only 2 souls were left to survive on a desolate, windswept mountain summit. Sail north to the frozen lands of Scandinavia, to the legends of the Vikings. They recalled a flood from a time long past that drowned all but 2. These lone survivors sought refuge from the deluge inside the massive world tree. Now to ancient Greece, where Deucalion and his wife endured a devastating flood. Zeus sent this great cataclysm to purge a corrupt and wicked early humanity. Their boat found its purchase on a mountaintop, saving them from utter destruction. And then there is the most famous narrative, the ancient story of Noah's Ark. 40 days and nights of rain that extinguished every single living creature on earth. The great ark came to rest on Mount Ararat, carrying the world's only survivors. Then came a rainbow, a promise such a disaster would never happen again. 6 distinct cultures on 6 different continents, separated by vast oceans and millennia. Civilizations that had no contact, shared no trade, and were utterly unaware of each other's existence. And yet every one of them tells the same story. Not echoes of one another. They are the same account. A worldwide catastrophe, surging waters, absolute destruction, a small group of survivors, and the rebirth of humanity. Mainstream archaeology dismisses this as mere coincidence. They claim that because floods are terrifying and universal experiences, humans naturally create flood myths. The parallels, they argue, are nothing more than a product of shared human psychology. But there is a detail they cannot reconcile. These are not simple tales of heavy rain. These accounts share the same specific timeline, the same sequence of events. Waters rising so swiftly that escape was impossible, the entire globe submerged, with only the highest mountains breaking the surface. A chosen few warned in advance. Animals preserved in pairs. A vessel that carried the seeds of the old world. And after the waters finally receded, the arrival of mysterious teachers to guide the survivors in rebuilding civilization. The statistical likelihood of this being coincidence is beyond astronomical. We are talking about hundreds of cultures, on every inhabited landmass, recounting the exact same story with the exact same core elements. Aboriginal Australians, with oral traditions reaching back 40,000 years. Mesopotamian societies from 12,000 years ago. Mayan codices, Chinese legends, Hawaiian chants, Persian texts, they all chronicle the same cataclysm. What if these are not myths? What if they are memories? What if, approximately 12,000 years ago, our planet endured a disaster so profound that it nearly erased humanity from existence? An event that obliterated an advanced civilization we have forgotten ever lived. An event that left only scattered survivors to whisper the story down through the ages, until memory hardened into myth. The proof is there. Geologists have discovered evidence of colossal flooding events that reshaped continents in mere days. Archaeologists are unearthing structures that should not exist, built with a technology that supposedly primitive humans could never wield. Climatologists have pinpointed a sudden, violent shift in Earth's climate that aligns perfectly with the timeline of these myths, and astronomers have recently confirmed that around 10,800 BCE, something from space struck our planet with force enough to trigger an extinction-level event. The establishment refuses to confront this. Careers have been ruined for suggesting human civilization is far older than we are taught. Evidence has been suppressed. Sites have been closed off. Researchers have been mocked and blacklisted. Because if these myths are real, if a global catastrophe did destroy an advanced pre-flood civilization, then everything we believe about our own history is wrong. Tonight we will examine the evidence they do not want you to see. We will visit the impossible structures that weathered the flood. We will decode the warnings our ancestors left etched in stone. We will show you the geological proof that something terrible befell this planet. And we will ask the question that academia refuses to answer. If all these myths describe the same global disaster, what truly happened 12,000 years ago? The first thing to grasp is the sheer specificity of these flood accounts. We are not dealing with vague allusions to rain or overflowing rivers. We are examining detailed, eerily consistent reports of a worldwide catastrophe that left nothing untouched. Our journey begins with the first great story ever recorded, the Epic of Gilgamesh. This is no obscure text, it is the genesis of epic poetry incised into clay tablets in ancient Mesopotamia around 2600 BCE. But the story it tells is far more ancient. Scholars believe it preserves memories from at least 5,000 years ago, and possibly much earlier. In the epic, a man named Utnapishtim recounts for Gilgamesh the time when the gods chose to annihilate humanity with a flood. The god Enki warns Utnapishtim in a dream, instructing him to dismantle his house and build a boat, not just any boat, but a massive ship with specific dimensions. Utnapishtim is commanded to bring aboard his family, craftsmen to preserve knowledge, and animals of every species. The flood arrives, raging for 6 days and 7 nights. When it ceases, the boat rests upon a mountain. Utnapishtim releases birds to check if the waters have subsided. A dove is sent out and returns. Then a swallow, which also comes back. Finally, a raven is released and does not return, signaling the reappearance of land. This is where the story becomes truly compelling. This narrative predates the biblical flood account by at least a millennium. When archaeologists first translated these tablets in the 19th century, it sent shockwaves through religious communities. The story of Noah was not original. It was a retelling of something far more ancient. But the trail goes deeper. In India, the ancient Hindu text known as the Satapatha Brahmana tells the story of Manu, the first man. The god Vishnu manifests as a fish, warning Manu that a great flood will destroy all creation. Vishnu commands Manu to build a boat and load it with seeds and animals. The flood comes and devastates the world. Manu's boat is tethered to the fish, which guides it to safety on a mountain peak. As the waters recede, Manu makes a sacrifice, from which a woman is born. Together, they repopulate the earth. The same story, a different continent, a different culture, different gods, but the identical sequence of events. Journey to ancient Greece. The poet Apollonius writes of Deucalion, the son of Prometheus. Zeus, seeing that humanity has grown wicked, resolves to destroy it. Prometheus warns his son. Deucalion constructs an ark. The flood comes, destroying everything. The ark drifts for 9 days and nights before landing on Mount Parnassus. Deucalion and his wife are the sole survivors. They repopulate the world by throwing stones over their shoulders, which transform into people. Once again, the same pattern, a divine warning, the construction of a vessel, total destruction, a mountain landing, and the survivors restarting humanity. Now let us travel somewhere truly unexpected, the Hawaiian Islands. Ancient Hawaiian tradition holds a story about a man named Nu'u. The god Cain, angered by humanity's corruption, decides to destroy the world with a flood. Cain warns Nu'u in advance. Nu'u builds a large canoe, bringing his family and pairs of animals on board. The deluge comes, covering everything but the peaks of the highest mountains. When the waters subside, Nu makes offerings to the moon, mistaking it for Cain. The true god Cain appears, corrects him, and Nu becomes the ancestor of all who followed. These islands were settled by Polynesians with no contact with Middle Eastern or European cultures, yet their flood story contains the exact same elements: the warning, the boat, the animals, the mountain peaks, the sole survivors. Let us turn to China. The story of Gun and Yu describes a catastrophic flood that covered the earth during the reign of Emperor Yao. The flood waters raged for decades. Gun attempts to stop it with dams but fails. His son Yu succeeds by dredging great channels to drain the water away. But the crucial detail is how the flood is described. It covered the entire world, reaching the heavens, swallowing hills and mountains. This was no local river flood. It was a global deluge. The Aztecs had a flood story. The Maya had a flood story. The Inca had a flood story. The Algonquian tribes of North America have a flood story. The Yoruba people of West Africa have a flood story. The Aboriginal Australians, whose oral traditions represent the oldest continuous culture on Earth, spanning 40,000 years or more, have multiple flood stories. The Australian stories are especially significant. These are a people who arrived on the continent at least 60,000 years ago. They were isolated from the rest of the world for tens of thousands of years. No contact with Mesopotamia, India, Greece, China, or the Americas. Yet their elders tell of a time when the sea levels rose so fast that people were forced to flee inland. A time when coastal lands vanished beneath the waves, and entire tribes were wiped out by the rising oceans. Modern science has confirmed this. Sea levels did rise catastrophically at the end of the last ice age. The Australian coastline once extended hundreds of miles farther out. Entire landscapes where Aboriginal people lived for millennia are now deep underwater. And they remember it. They passed that memory down through 40,000 years of oral tradition. Mainstream scholars, however, still call it coincidence. They maintain that flood myths are a natural byproduct of human life near water. Since every culture experiences floods, every culture invents flood stories. The similarities, they claim, are just convergent mythology. But that fails to explain the specifics. It does not explain why cultures separated by oceans and millennia all include the same unique elements: the advanced warning from a deity, the construction of a vessel to precise dimensions, the inclusion of animals in pairs, the landing on a mountain after the waters abate, the sending of birds to test for dry land, the survival of only a handful of people, and the restarting of civilization from those survivors. These are not generic flood stories. These are specific, detailed accounts of the same event. Then there is the pattern that no one discusses. In nearly every one of these myths, there is a mention of survivors who bring knowledge to help rebuild. The Sumerians called them the Apkallu, 7 sages who existed before the flood and returned after to teach humanity the arts of civilization. The Egyptians spoke of the Shemsu Hor, the followers of Horus, a mysterious group from before the pharaohs, who possessed advanced knowledge. The Maya spoke of Kukulkan, the feathered serpent god who came from across the sea to teach astronomy, architecture, and agriculture. The Inca spoke of Viracocha, a bearded, fair-skinned figure who appeared after the flood to teach the survivors how to farm, build, and organize society. Who were these teachers? Where did they come from? And why do cultures worldwide describe the same figures arriving after the flood with the same knowledge? Mainstream archaeology has no answer. These figures are dismissed as mythological gods, creations of a primitive imagination. But what if these myths preserve a real memory? What if there were indeed survivors from a pre-flood civilization who traveled the world, desperately trying to preserve their knowledge before it vanished forever? Consider this. If our civilization collapsed tomorrow, if a catastrophe wiped out 99% of humanity, what would the survivors recall 1,000 years from now? They would remember the disaster. They would remember a great civilization existed before. They would remember that some people survived and tried to pass on what they knew. Over generations, those memories would become stories. Those stories would become myths. And those myths would sound exactly like the ones we are examining right now. The flood myths are too consistent, too detailed, and too widespread to be a coincidence. They describe the same disaster, the same timeline, the same survivors, and the same aftermath. Cultures that never met tell the same story. And the story they tell aligns with geological evidence we are only now starting to comprehend. Something happened. Something terrible. Something that nearly ended the human race. And every culture on Earth remembers it. Every single culture on Earth remembers it. Every culture on Earth tells the same flood story. Now comes the moment when science stops laughing and starts paying attention. Because around 12,800 years ago something truly cataclysmic happened to our planet, and we have the physical evidence to prove it. This is a chapter in Earth's history known as the Younger Dryas period. The name is derived from a flower, Dryas octopetala, that suddenly flourished across Europe during this time. Scientists use it as a marker because it grows only in Arctic conditions, which tells a terrifying story. Europe, which had been warming steadily since the last ice age, suddenly plunged back into a deep freeze, almost overnight. We are not talking about a gradual cooling over centuries. We are talking about temperature drops of 20 degrees Fahrenheit in less than a decade. Some ice core samples suggest it happened even faster. 3 years, perhaps less. Less? Let that reality sink in. Imagine waking up one morning to a completely different climate. Your farmland is frozen solid. Your water sources are locked in ice. The animals you depend on have either perished or migrated away. This is not a harsh winter. This is the new permanent reality, and it lasts for 1,200 years. This is the new permanent reality, and it lasts for 1,200 years. What could cause such an event? For decades, scientists debated. Some pointed to changes in ocean currents. Others blamed massive volcanic activity. Some proposed that melting ice sheets released a torrent of fresh water into the North Atlantic, shutting down the Gulf Stream. All were plausible theories. None could fully explain the sheer speed of the change or the global scale of the catastrophe. Then, in 2007, a team of researchers led by Richard Firestone published a paper that changed everything. They offered a radical proposal. What if the Younger Dryas was not triggered by gradual climate processes? What if something hit us from space? Their hypothesis unfolds like this. Around 10,800 BCE, Earth passed through the debris field of a fragmenting comet. Multiple impacts struck the northern hemisphere, some slamming into the vast ice sheets covering North America and Europe. The impacts were colossal, unleashing explosions equivalent to millions of nuclear bombs. The ice sheets, already 2 miles thick in places, absorbed most of the direct kinetic energy, but the thermal shock was unimaginable. Imagine dropping an object so hot into ice, thick, that it instantly vaporizes billions of tons of water. The steam alone would have blasted into the atmosphere with the force of volcanic eruptions. The intense heat would have caused massive portions of the ice sheets to melt catastrophically, not over centuries, but in days, maybe hours, and this is where it becomes truly terrifying. When that much ice melts that quickly, where does the water go? Into the oceans, all at once. Sea levels do not rise gradually, they surge. Coastal areas across the entire planet would have been inundated with no warning. Tidal waves hundreds of feet high would have raced inland at hundreds of miles per hour. Everything at low elevation would have been drowned. Everything. And that was just the water. The impacts would have ejected millions of tons of debris into the atmosphere. Dust, ash, vaporized rock. All of it would have blocked out the sun. Temperatures would plummet. The remaining ice sheets would begin to grow again instead of melting. Animals that survived the initial blasts would now face starvation. Megafauna that had thrived for millions of years went extinct within a generation. Woolly mammoths, saber-toothed cats, giant ground sloths, American camels and horses, mastodons, all vanished. Not gradually. Suddenly. Humans nearly went extinct too. Genetic studies reveal a massive population bottleneck at precisely this time. Humanity was reduced to perhaps a few thousand individuals worldwide. We came within a hair's breadth of disappearing entirely. When this hypothesis was first proposed, the academic establishment went into an uproar. They attacked it viciously, labeling it pseudoscience, claiming there was no evidence, and accusing the researchers of being catastrophists, which in academic circles is a term of derision. The idea that Earth's history is shaped by sudden, violent events, rather than slow, gradual processes, contradicts the very foundation of modern geology. A scientist named Charles Lyell established the principle of uniformitarianism in the 1830s, the idea that the present is the key to the past, that everything happens slowly and gradually. No catastrophes, no sudden changes, just steady processes over millions of years. But there was a problem. The evidence for the Younger Dryas impact kept mounting, and it became impossible to ignore. Researchers discovered a layer of sediment dating to exactly 10,800 BCE that appears across the northern hemisphere. This layer contains things that should not be there. Nanodiamonds, microscopic diamonds that form only under the extreme temperature and pressure of a cosmic impact. They found magnetic spherules, tiny balls of melted rock formed when material was ejected into the atmosphere and rained back down. They found high concentrations of platinum and iridium, elements rare on Earth's surface but common in asteroids and comets. They found a black layer of sediment across North America called the Black Mat. It sits directly at the Younger Dryas boundary. Below it, you find evidence of human settlement and abundant animal life. Above it there is nothing. It is a line drawn through time, erasing everything. Geologist Randall Carlson has spent decades documenting the physical scars of this event. He focuses on a landscape in Washington state known as the Channeled Scablands. It is a terrain that looks as if it were carved by flowing water, except the scale is all wrong. We are not talking about rivers. We are talking about torrents of water so massive and powerful that they ripped away hundreds of feet of solid bedrock and carried house-sized boulders for hundreds of miles. Mainstream geology once claimed this landscape was formed over millions of years of slow erosion. Then, in the 1920s, a scientist named J. Harlan Bretz proposed something different. He argued the scablands were carved by catastrophic flooding, massive walls of water moving faster than a freight train, scouring everything in their path. He was ridiculed for decades. They called him a crackpot. But eventually the evidence became undeniable. He was right. The scablands were formed by megafloods. But where did that much water come from? The answer is the Cordilleran ice sheet, a colossal wall of ice covering much of North America. When the comet fragments hit, the thermal shock caused huge portions of this ice sheet to collapse. Lakes of meltwater trapped behind ice dams suddenly burst free. The volume of water released was equivalent to all the Great Lakes being emptied in a matter of days. Carlson has identified similar flood scarring all over North America in Montana, Idaho, Oregon. Everywhere you look, there is evidence of water flowing on a scale that defies imagination, and it all dates to the same period, the Younger Dryas boundary. This was not just a North American event. Similar evidence has been found in Europe, Asia, and South America. This was global. Antarctic ice cores tell the story from the bottom of the world. Scientists drill through layers of ice, each layer a year of snowfall. When they reach the layer from 10,800 BCE, the chemistry changes dramatically. There is a spike in atmospheric dust, a sudden shift in oxygen isotopes, indicating rapid temperature change, and evidence of massive volcanic activity occurring simultaneously worldwide. The megafauna extinction is another smoking gun. Within a geological instant, roughly 60 genera of large animals disappeared from North America alone. These were animals that had survived multiple ice ages over millions of years. They had adapted to every climate shift Earth threw at them. Then suddenly they were gone. All of them. At the same time. Traditional science claims humans hunted them to extinction. But that theory doesn't hold up. There were not enough humans, and we lacked the technology to wipe out entire species across 2 continents in a few decades. Moreover, many of these animals went extinct in places humans had not yet reached. Something else killed them, something sudden and overwhelming. Graham Hancock has been writing about this for years. He is a journalist, not a scientist, and the academic establishment despises him for it. They call him a pseudo-scientist, a conspiracy theorist, a threat to real archaeology. But here is what they cannot dispute. Hancock has been saying for decades that an advanced civilization existed before the flood, and that a cosmic impact around 10,800 BCE destroyed it. He wrote about it in his book, Fingerprints of the Gods, back in 1995. The academics laughed, calling him crazy. Then, in 2007, the Younger Dryas Impact Hypothesis was published. Suddenly, Hancock didn't seem so crazy anymore. The cosmic impact he had described turned out to be real. The catastrophic climate change he detailed turned out to be real. The mass extinction he wrote about turned out to be real. The flooding he claimed reshaped coastlines turned out to be real. And yet the establishment still refuses to admit he might be onto something. Why? Because if Hancock is right about the impact, maybe he is right about the civilization too. Maybe there really was an advanced culture living on the coastlines before the floods came. Maybe they possessed knowledge and technology we have not credited them with. Maybe human history is far older and more sophisticated than we have been taught. The evidence is undeniable. The Younger Dryas impact happened. We have the nanodiamonds, the platinum layer, the magnetic spherules, the megaflood scars, the extinction event, the ice core data, the black mat. All of it points to the same conclusion. Around 12,800 years ago, Earth was struck by fragments of a comet. The impact triggered climate chaos, megafloods and mass extinction. Coastal civilizations were wiped out. Humanity barely survived, and every culture on Earth remembers it. They call it the flood. They carved the story into stone. They passed it down through oral tradition. They encoded it in their myths, because it was not a myth. It was the worst thing that ever happened to our species. And we have spent 12,000 years trying to forget. In 1994, amidst the rolling hills of southeastern Turkey, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt stumbled upon something that would shatter our understanding of human history. Local farmers had been finding strange carved stones for years, assuming they were part of an old cemetery. Schmidt took one look and knew this was something else entirely. He began to dig, and what he unearthed should not exist. The site is called Göbekli Tepe, which translates to Potbelly Hill, not the most dramatic name for what may be the most important archaeological discovery of the last century. Because what Schmidt found was a massive temple complex, built with sophisticated architectural knowledge and profound artistic skill. Enormous T-shaped limestone pillars were arranged in circles, some weighing up to 20 tons, adorned with intricate reliefs of animals: foxes, lions, scorpions, snakes, vultures, and bulls. The craftsmanship is breathtaking. These are not crude etchings made by primitive hands. They are detailed, lifelike sculptures that would be at home in a modern art museum. But here is the part that breaks the timeline. When Schmidt dated the site, he could not believe the results. He dated it again and again. Every test returned the same impossible answer. Göbekli Tepe was built around 9,600 BCE, that is 11,600 years ago. To put that in perspective, this temple was already 6,000 years old when the pyramids were built. It was ancient when the first stones of Stonehenge were raised. It predates pottery, writing, and the wheel. According to the established timeline of human development, the people who built this were supposed to be primitive hunter-gatherers, living in small nomadic bands, barely surviving, and certainly incapable of organizing massive construction projects. Yet here it is, 20 circular enclosures, each one requiring hundreds of workers, advanced planning, engineering knowledge, and the ability to quarry, transport, and erect stones weighing as much as a small truck, all without metal tools, draft animals, or any of the technology we assume is necessary for such work. The academic world was thrown into disarray by Göbekli Tepe. It did not fit. It could not fit. It demanded a rewriting of textbooks that had been established for decades. So they did what academics often do when faced with paradigm-shattering evidence. They tried to minimize it. They called it an anomaly. They suggested it was not that sophisticated. Perhaps the dating was wrong. Maybe it was just a ceremonial site built by a lucky group of primitives who managed one impressive feat before returning to their simple lives of hunting and gathering. Except the problems kept multiplying. Göbekli Tepe was not alone. Ground-penetrating radar revealed that only 5% of the site has been excavated. At least 15 more circular structures lie buried beneath the hill, possibly more, each as sophisticated as the last. This was no one-off achievement. It was a sustained building program that spanned centuries. Then archaeologists began finding similar sites throughout the region: Karahan Tepe, Nevalachori, Halan Shemi. All of them displayed the same level of sophistication, all dated to the same impossible time period. Suddenly, we are not talking about one anomaly. We are talking about an entire culture, a civilization that existed at the end of the last ice age, before agriculture, before cities, before everything we thought was a prerequisite for complex society. Now let us turn to Pillar 43. This is where the story deepens. One of the pillars at Göbekli Tepe is covered in symbols that researchers have been trying to decode since its discovery. At the top of the pillar is a clear depiction of a scorpion. Below it, a series of abstract symbols, and at its center, a grouping of circular and angular shapes that resemble a diagram. In 2017, researchers from the University of Edinburgh proposed that Pillar 43 might be an astronomical record, specifically a record of a cosmic impact. Using software to reconstruct the night sky of 11,600 years ago, they found something remarkable. The symbols on the pillar match the constellations that would have been visible at that exact time. The scorpion represents Scorpius. Other animals represent other star groups, and the central symbols could represent a comet or meteor swarm. The researchers argued that Pillar 43 is a memorial, a warning carved in stone to commemorate a catastrophic impact event witnessed by the builders, an event that caused massive destruction and climate change, an event that matches the Younger Dryas impact almost perfectly. Think about the implications. The people who built Göbekli Tepe possessed advanced astronomical knowledge. They understood the movement of the stars. They could track celestial objects. They recorded a comet impact in symbolic form, and they built a massive temple complex to preserve that memory. Why? Because they knew what had happened. They had survived it, and they wanted to ensure future generations would never forget. Klaus Schmidt believed Göbekli Tepe was built by survivors of a catastrophe. Before his death in 2014, he theorized that the site represented a final repository of knowledge from a dying civilization. He argued that the temple builders were not primitive hunter-gatherers at all, but the remnants of something far more advanced, something that existed before the Younger Dryas impact, and was destroyed by it. And here is the strangest part. Around 8000 BCE, roughly 2000 years after Göbekli Tepe was built, someone deliberately buried the entire site. Not abandoned, but buried. They filled in the structures with thousands of tons of dirt and rubble, a monumental effort that required as much labor as building the site in the first place. Why would anyone do that? Why spend generations building something so extraordinary, only to intentionally hide it from the world? Schmidt believed it was an act of preservation. The builders knew another catastrophe might be coming, so they buried the site to protect it, to keep the knowledge safe for whoever might unearth it thousands of years later, which is exactly what happened. Göbekli Tepe lay undisturbed for 10,000 years, until a German archaeologist with a hunch started digging in the Turkish hills. But mainstream archaeology still resists the obvious conclusion. They admit Göbekli Tepe is older and more sophisticated than it should be. They admit it changes our understanding of prehistory, but they refuse to take the next logical step, to consider that there may have been a civilization before the flood that we have completely overlooked. Graham Hancock has been shouting this from the rooftops for years. He points to Göbekli Tepe as definitive proof of his theory. An advanced culture existed at the end of the Ice Age. It was destroyed by a cosmic impact. The survivors scattered, trying to preserve what they knew. And sites like Göbekli Tepe are the fingerprints they left behind. The timeline matches perfectly. Plato wrote of Atlantis, a sophisticated civilization destroyed by floods and earthquakes around 9600 BCE. That is the exact same time Göbekli Tepe was being built. Is that a coincidence? Or is Plato's account, which he claimed came from Egyptian priests with records going back thousands of years, actually describing the same event that the builders of Göbekli Tepe were memorializing? We know coastal areas were devastated by rising sea levels at the end of the Ice Age. Hundreds of miles of coastline disappeared. If a pre-flood civilization existed, they would have built their cities near the ocean, in fertile lowlands that are now submerged. We wouldn't find their cities, because they are under 400 feet of water. What we would find are the inland sites, the highlands where survivors fled, places like Göbekli Tepe. And the evidence keeps mounting. In 2019, archaeologists announced another massive stone complex in Turkey called Boncuklu Tarla. It is even older than Göbekli Tepe. The timeline of sophisticated construction in this region keeps getting pushed back. The Turkish government has been strangely restrictive about who excavates these sites. Large portions of Göbekli Tepe remain off-limits to foreign researchers. Some suggest political reasons. Others suggest there are findings that have not been made public, artifacts or structures even more controversial than what has already been revealed. Klaus Schmidt hinted at this before he died, saying there were things about Göbekli Tepe that mainstream archaeology would find very difficult to accept. We do not know what he meant. What we do know is this: 11,600 years ago, someone in southeastern Turkey built a temple complex that should not exist, with knowledge that supposedly did not exist, decorated with astronomical symbols that recorded a cosmic catastrophe. They used it for centuries, and then they buried it, preserving a message carved in 20-ton stones. The message says, "Human history is not what you think. Civilization is older than you have been told. We were here. We built this. We survived the catastrophe. And we are warning you, because it could happen again." Göbekli Tepe is not an anomaly. It is evidence that our understanding of human civilization is, at best, incomplete. And that is precisely why the establishment does not want to talk about it. Göbekli Tepe is not the only structure that refuses to fit the official timeline. All over the world stand monuments that should not be where they are, built in ways that should not be possible, showing signs of water damage at elevations where water should never reach. When you connect the dots, a deeply uncomfortable picture begins to emerge. Let us begin underwater. Off the coast of Yonaguni, Japan, divers in 1986 discovered what appeared to be massive, man-made stone structures. They found right angles, flat surfaces, parallel edges, and what looked like stairs, terraces, and carved channels sitting about 100 feet below the surface. Marine geologist Masaki Kimura has spent decades studying it. Convinced it is artificial, he points to tool marks, post holes, and decorative elements that cannot be explained by natural processes. The debate over Yonaguni has raged for 30 years. Skeptics claim it is just unusual geology. Yet, if it is natural, why does it so closely resemble the ancient stone architecture on the island above it? And why do these supposed natural formations align so perfectly with the cardinal directions? Most importantly, when was Yonaguni above water? Sea levels were low enough for this structure to be on dry land approximately 10,000 years ago, right around the time of the Younger Dryas. If it is artificial, it was built before the flood, before the rising waters swallowed it whole. But Yonaguni is not alone. In 2001, Marine archaeologists exploring the Gulf of Cambay off the coast of India discovered what appeared to be an entire city underwater. Sonar images revealed geometric patterns, grid layouts, and massive structures extending over 5 square miles. They recovered artifacts, pottery, beads, pieces of worked wood. When they carbon dated the wood, it came back 9,500 years old. 9,500 years. That predates the Indus Valley civilization by 6,000 years. According to official history, there should be no cities on Earth that old. Yet here one sits on the ocean floor. The National Institute of Ocean Technology confirmed the findings. Then the story vanished from mainstream archaeology. No one wanted to discuss it, because no one could explain it. Similar underwater structures have been found off Cuba, in the Mediterranean, and near the Bahamas. The Bimini Road is a linear arrangement of stones too regular and too well placed to be natural. The psychic Edgar Cayce predicted in the 1930s that evidence of Atlantis would be found near Bimini in 1968, the exact year the structure was discovered. A coincidence, perhaps. Or perhaps Cayce tapped into a collective memory of what once existed there. Now let us return to dry land, to Egypt and the Great Sphinx at Giza. Officially, it was built around 2500 BCE by Pharaoh Khafre. That is what every textbook says. But there is a massive problem. The Sphinx shows clear evidence of water erosion. Not wind erosion, but deep vertical channels cut into the limestone, the kind formed by heavy rainfall over long periods. The issue is that Egypt has been a desert for the last 5,000 years. There has not been enough rainfall to cause that kind of erosion since well before the pharaohs. But if you go back further, before the Younger Dryas, Egypt was lush and green, with regular monsoon rains. Geologist Robert Schoch examined the Sphinx in the early 1990s. A professor at Boston University with a PhD from Yale, his specialty is rock weathering. He saw immediately that the erosion patterns did not match the timeline. Based purely on the weathering, Schoch proposed the Sphinx had to be far older, dating to at least 7,000 to 9,000 BCE, and possibly earlier. The Egyptology establishment went ballistic. Zahi Hawass, the former head of Egyptian antiquities, called Schoch an amateur and a fraud, viciously attacking him and denying him access to sites. But Schoch stood his ground. The weathering patterns are consistent with sustained rainfall, and the Sphinx enclosure shows the same water erosion. Either Egyptology is right and wind in a desert somehow mimicked water erosion, or Schoch is right and the Sphinx is thousands of years older than we have been told. One explanation requires ignoring basic geology. The other requires rewriting history. Let us go to South America, to Pumapunku in Bolivia. This site officially dates to around 500 CE, but it displays construction techniques that are baffling. The stones are cut with machine-like precision, perfect right angles, and interlocking blocks with tolerances measured in millimeters. Some cuts could only be made with diamond-tipped tools or high-speed machinery. The stones themselves are andesite and diorite, among the hardest rocks on Earth. The copper chisels, supposedly used by the Tiwanaku people, cannot cut these stones. Engineer Christopher Dunn, a specialist in machining, says the accuracy matches modern CNC milling, not ancient hand tools. Some of these stones weigh over 100 tons and were transported from a quarry 10 miles away, across a lake. The official explanation of reed boats and log rollers has been tested and fails. Or look at the Osirian at Abydos in Egypt. This temple sits next to the Temple of Seti I, but uses completely different construction, massive limestone and granite blocks weighing up to 100 tons, fitted together without mortar. It sits 40 feet below the current ground level and has been flooded for most of its existence. The walls show water damage far above the current water table, suggesting it was subjected to much higher water levels in the past. Some researchers believe it predates the Temple of Seti by thousands of years. Then there is Nan Madol in Micronesia, an ancient city built on artificial islands from massive basalt columns, stacked like logs. It covers 11 square miles. Some stones weigh 25 tons and had to be transported by sea. Local legends say it is ancient, built by twin sorcerers who levitated the stones into place. When you stand before these impossible structures, you cannot escape the feeling that we are missing something fundamental about our past. These are not primitive constructions. They are engineered works that required advanced planning, sophisticated mathematics, and precision tools. And so many of them show the scars of water damage that should not be there unless something catastrophic happened, something that matches exactly what the myths describe and what the geological record confirms. A global flood that destroyed whatever civilization created these monuments, leaving behind only the most massive and durable structures as proof they ever existed. After the waters receded, after the ice retreated, and the ash settled, there were survivors. They wandered a transformed landscape. Coastlines had shifted hundreds of miles. Entire regions were submerged. But according to myths from every corner of the planet, these survivors were not alone. They had help. Teachers arrived, mysterious figures who came from somewhere else, bringing knowledge that allowed civilization to restart. The Sumerians called them the Apkallu, 7 sages who existed before the Great Flood. They are depicted in stone reliefs as strange hybrid beings, sometimes fish-bodied with human heads, sometimes as bearded figures wearing what look like wristwatches and carrying mysterious handbags. The texts describe them as possessing knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, architecture, and law. After the deluge, the Apkallu returned, taught the survivors how to rebuild, and then disappeared from history. In Egypt, there is a parallel tradition of the Shemsu Hor, the followers of Horus. Egyptian priests told of a time before the pharaohs, a first time called Zep Tepi, when gods walked among men. The Edfu building texts speak of beings who came from an island that was destroyed, who possessed the knowledge of the primeval age, and set about recreating what had been lost. They built the first temples and encoded astronomical knowledge into stone. Then, like the Apkallu, they faded into myth. Cross the Atlantic to South America. The Inca spoke of Viracocha, a pale-skinned, bearded figure who arrived after a great flood. He traveled the land teaching agriculture, astronomy, and architecture. According to legend, he appeared at Tiwanaku, the site of Pumapunku's impossible stonework, and either built it or instructed others how. When his work was done, he walked into the ocean and vanished. The Maya and Aztecs had their version, Quetzalcoatl, or Kukulkan, a bearded teacher who came from across the Eastern Sea. He taught writing, mathematics, and astronomy. He established calendars of shocking accuracy, built pyramids aligned to celestial events, and then sailed away, promising to one day return. The pattern repeats across the Pacific. In Polynesia, the god Maui is credited with bringing fire and teaching navigation. In Aboriginal Australian traditions, the sky heroes, or Wandjina, came during the dream time and taught law and survival skills. They are depicted in ancient rock art as large figures with halos, looking almost extraterrestrial. In Mesopotamia, the Babylonians remembered Oannes, a being who emerged daily from the Persian Gulf. He had the body of a fish but was a man underneath. He taught humans writing, science, and art, returning to the sea each night. Who were these figures? Why do cultures separated by oceans describe the same archetype? A wise teacher, often unusual in appearance, arriving after a catastrophe, bringing advanced knowledge, and then disappearing. The mainstream explanation is Jung's theory of archetypes, universal symbols that emerge from shared human psychology. But that feels insufficient. These are not vague wise men. They bring specific knowledge, astronomy, agriculture, architecture to cultures that supposedly had no prior contact with civilization. Hunter-gatherers who, within a few generations, develop writing, build cities, and create complex calendars. This is not gradual cultural evolution. This is a knowledge transfer. Graham Hancock proposes a logical explanation. What if these teachers were real people? Survivors from a pre-flood civilization. When the cataclysm struck, small groups escaped, possessing boats, navigational skills, and advanced knowledge. After the waters receded, they set out to preserve their culture, traveling to where pockets of humanity survived and jump-starting civilization in multiple locations. Over generations, their true origins were forgotten, leaving only garbled legends of gods and sages who came from the sea. This would explain the sudden appearance of advanced knowledge across the globe. Around 10,000 BCE, agriculture appears independently in at least 7 different regions. This Neolithic revolution happens too rapidly to be natural evolution. Something accelerated the process. What if that something was knowledge brought by survivors? The same pattern appears with astronomy. Suddenly, cultures worldwide are tracking the precession of the equinoxes, a phenomenon that takes 25,702 years to complete one cycle. How did Stone Age humans independently discover something that requires centuries of sophisticated observation unless someone taught them? Then there is the mystery of the giants. Nearly every ancient culture has legends of giant humans who lived before the flood. The Bible mentions the Nephilim. Greek mythology has its titans. Norse legends speak of the Jotun. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, newspapers across America regularly reported discoveries of giant skeletons, 7, 8, even 10 feet tall. These reports came from credible sources, yet today none of these skeletons can be found. Many researchers accuse the Smithsonian Institution of collecting and then hiding these remains because they do not fit the narrative. Modern science has shown that multiple human species, like the Neanderthals and Denisovans, coexisted with Homo sapiens. Denisovans in particular were large and robust. What if the giant legends are folk memories of encounters with these older human relatives? What if some of these beings possessed advanced knowledge? What if they were the teachers? The survivors brought knowledge. The myths say it. The archaeological record suggests it. The sudden appearance of civilization supports it. Someone jump-started humanity after the catastrophe. They taught us how to rebuild, and then they disappeared into the fog of prehistory, leaving behind only legends and questions we are only now beginning to answer. The ancients were obsessed with the sky. Every major civilization devoted enormous resources to tracking celestial movements. They built massive structures aligned to stars, planets, and seasonal markers. Why? The standard explanation is religion. But what if there was a more practical reason? What if they were building a warning system? Start with the Great Pyramid of Giza. Egyptologists insist it was a tomb for Pharaoh Khufu, yet no mummy was ever found inside, and there are no identifying hieroglyphs. As an astronomical instrument, however, it is a masterpiece. It is aligned to true north with an accuracy of 3/60ths of a single degree. Its dimensions encode mathematical constants like pi. In the 1960s, astronomers calculated that its internal shafts pointed to specific stars. The southern shaft of the King's Chamber aimed directly at Orion's belt. The northern shaft pointed to the pole star of that era, Thuban. Robert Bauval took this further, noticing that the 3 pyramids at Giza perfectly match the 3 stars in Orion's belt, not as they appeared in 2500 BCE, but as they looked around 10,500 BCE, right at the end of the Younger Dryas. Bauval's Orion correlation theory caused an uproar, but the alignment is real. Either it is an impossible coincidence, or the pyramids were designed to commemorate a date far older than mainstream archaeology will accept. Now travel to Cambodia. The layout of Angkor Wat and its surrounding temples has been found to match the constellation Draco as it appeared around 10,500 BCE. Again the same date. At Tiwanaku in Bolivia, the Calasasaya platform is aligned to the solstices and equinoxes, but the alignment was accurate around 9,500 BCE. Why would anyone memorialize a date thousands of years before they lived unless something significant happened then? Stonehenge, Newgrange, Karnak, everywhere you look, Ancient people were building massive monuments aligned to celestial events with enormous effort. Why? What if these monuments were astronomical computers designed to track cosmic threats? In 1901, divers discovered the Antikythera mechanism, a 2,000-year-old analog computer of stunning complexity. It calculated astronomical positions and predicted eclipses. Nothing approaching its sophistication appears again for 1,000 years. It proves that ancient people were capable of building incredibly complex astronomical instruments. If they could build that 2,000 years ago, what could they have built 10,000 years ago? Van Balabakan years ago. The Maya tracked Venus cycles with obsessive precision. The Vedic texts from India describe yugas, cosmic ages of creation and destruction, and recorded the precession of the equinoxes thousands of years before Western science. The Dogon tribe of Mali possessed knowledge of Sirius B, a companion star to Sirius invisible to the naked eye, which they claimed was taught to them by amphibious visitors from the sky called the Nomo. All across the ancient world, people were watching the sky with a level of sophistication that seems absurd. They were calculating cycles that take millennia to complete. Graham Hancock argues that survivors of the pre-flood civilization encoded critical information into these monuments and myths, hoping future generations could decode it. The alignments point to a specific date, 10,500 BCE, the time when everything changed. What were they warning us about? The possibility that it could happen again. If a comet strike caused the Younger Dryas, then the debris field from that object might still be out there, and Earth might pass through it again. Ancient people understood cycles. They understood that what happened before could happen again. So they built monuments that would survive any catastrophe, aligned them to the sky so future astronomers would understand the message. They were saying, look up, pay attention, track what is out there, because it is not over. Modern astronomers are starting to listen. We now actively track near-Earth objects. But we are also discovering how many close calls we have had. The Chelyabinsk meteor in 2013 exploded over Russia, injuring over 1,000 people. We never saw it coming. The ancients built a warning system in stone because they survived one catastrophe. They did not want future humans to be caught unprepared for the next one. The pyramids, the temples, the stone circles, they are all pointing up, telling us to watch the sky, telling us to remember. Academia has a dirty secret. It does not seek truth. It seeks consensus. When evidence challenges the established narrative, the response is not curiosity, but hostility. Take the case of Virginia Steen McIntyre. In the 1970s, this respected geologist used multiple methods to date an archaeological site in Mexico called Hueyatlaco. They all pointed to the same conclusion. The site, which contained advanced stone tools, was 250,000 years old. This was impossible. Humans were not supposed to be in the Americas until 15,000 years ago at the earliest. Steen McIntyre reported her findings, and her career ended. The lead archaeologist refused to publish the dates. She was blacklisted, her papers rejected, her funding cut. The site is now closed to research. Or consider John Anthony West and Robert Schoch, when they presented geological evidence that the Sphinx was thousands of years older than claimed. Zahi Hawass, who controlled access to every major site in Egypt, led a ruthless campaign to discredit them. He called them charlatans, banned them from sites, and refused to engage with their evidence. Archaeology in Egypt is not just about science. It is about national pride and tourism revenue. Any suggestion of a pre-pharaonic advanced civilization threatens that narrative, so it is suppressed. This dynamic exists everywhere. Then there is the Smithsonian controversy. Throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, newspapers across America reported discoveries of giant skeletons and anomalous artifacts. Many were reportedly sent to the Smithsonian Institution for study. Today, none of these artifacts can be found. The Smithsonian claims they never existed or were lost, but the volume of reports is staggering. Conspiracy theorists claim the Smithsonian deliberately destroyed evidence that contradicted the narrative. The academic funding structure makes dissent nearly impossible. To get research grants, you must propose projects that peer reviewers who have built their careers on existing paradigms will approve. Propose something that challenges those paradigms, and you will not get funded. This is why researchers like Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson operate outside the traditional academic structure. They can follow the evidence wherever it leads, and that terrifies the establishment, because they cannot be controlled. The attacks on them are personal and vicious, often using the label pseudoscience to dismiss evidence without actually engaging with it. The Younger Dryas Impact Hypothesis is a perfect case study. First proposed in 2007, it was ridiculed, but younger researchers started testing it and kept finding supporting evidence. By 2018, the weight of evidence became overwhelming, and the hypothesis went from fringe to accepted. But it took over a decade of bitter fighting. Why the resistance? Because accepting the impact means accepting catastrophism, the idea that sudden, violent events shape Earth's history. This contradicts the principle of uniformitarianism, the dogma that all change is slow and gradual. Admitting a cosmic impact nearly ended human civilization means admitting that the entire geological and archaeological timeline might be wrong. It is easier to attack the researchers and protect the paradigm, even if it means ignoring reality. But reality is asserting itself. The evidence keeps accumulating. The internet has broken the academic monopoly on information. The gatekeepers are losing control, and they are terrified. Because once people start questioning the timeline of human civilization, the entire edifice of establishment archaeology begins to crumble. The cover-up is failing. The truth is too big to hide. The ancient warnings were not just about what happened. They were about what could happen again. And there is growing evidence that the threat which nearly destroyed humanity 12,000 years ago is still out there. Meet the Taurid Meteor stream. Twice a year, Earth passes through a massive debris field left by a disintegrating comet. Most years, this results in nothing more than a meteor shower. But the Taurid stream contains dense clusters of material, including fragments large enough to cause serious damage if they hit us. The stream's parent body is Comet in Encke, but Encke is just a remnant of a giant comet that began breaking apart 20,000 to 30,000 years ago. Somewhere in that stream is a mountain-sized object we know exists but cannot currently locate. Astronomers Victor Klube and Bill Napier have identified what they call coherent catastrophism. Roughly every 3,000 years, Earth passes through the thickest part of the stream, and when we do, impact events spike dramatically, and civilizations collapse. They point to the collapse of multiple civilizations around 2200 BCE, and the Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE, arguing both were torrid encounters. And of course the Younger Dryas impact of 10,800 BCE was the big one. Now here is the concerning part. We are entering another peak period. Between 2000 and 2040, Earth will pass through a denser than normal section of the Taurid stream. One might think governments would take this seriously, but there is almost complete silence. Some researchers believe it is deliberate. Governments know the risk but do not want to cause panic. So they say nothing, but we have already had close calls. On June 30, 1908, something exploded over Tunguska, Siberia, with the force of 15 megatons of TNT, flattening 800 square miles of forest. It was most likely a fragment from the Taurid stream. On February 15, 2013, a meteor exploded over Chelyabinsk, Russia, injuring over 1,000 people. We did not see it coming. Ancient civilizations knew about this. The Egyptians tracked the cycles. The Maya calculated the dangerous periods. They encoded warnings in their temples and texts, telling us to watch the sky, to remember the cycles, to prepare. Hopi prophecies speak of the blue Kashina, a celestial object that will signal a time of destruction. The Book of Revelation describes stars falling from heaven. Norse mythology predicts Ragnarok, when fire will consume the world. Are these religious visions or descriptions of impact events encoded in mythological language? Modern governments are not completely ignoring the threat. They are building bunkers, seed vaults like the one in Svalbard, and underground military facilities. These are not just Cold War relics, they are preparation. But the ancients gave us a different message. Knowledge is protection. Awareness is survival. They built their monuments to last because they wanted future generations to understand the danger. The Taurid stream is real. The debris field is there. Maybe nothing will happen. Or maybe on some random night in the next few decades, the sky will light up, and we will understand in our final moments why every ancient civilization told the same story about fire from heaven. Because they were not myths. They were memories. They were memories, and memories have a way of becoming reality again when the cycle's complete. Forget the myths for a moment. Let us talk about rocks, dirt, physical evidence carved into the landscape. Walk through the Himalayas at 20,000 feet, and you will find fossilized seashells. The standard explanation is plate tectonics, pushing the seafloor up over millions of years. Except these fossils show signs of rapid burial, which does not happen over millions of years. It happens when something buries them fast. The same phenomenon appears on mountain peaks across the world. Marine fossils where water should never have reached, suggesting something moved enormous volumes of water rapidly across continents. Now look at sediment layers. Geologists find polystrate fossils, fossilized trees extending vertically through multiple rock layers that supposedly took millions of years to form. A tree cannot stand upright for millions of years while sediment slowly accumulates around it. The only way a polystrate fossil forms is if the sediment was deposited rapidly, burying entire forests so quickly the trees remained vertical. This requires flooding on a massive, catastrophic scale. Then there are erratic boulders, massive rocks sitting in locations where their geology does not match the surrounding area. The standard theory is that glaciers carried them, but some of these erratics sit in places where glaciers never reached. An alternative explanation is water tsunamis of such magnitude that they carried house-sized boulders inland. Randall Carlson has documented flood scarring across North America that points to water flowing with unimaginable power. He calculates flows that make the Amazon look like a stream, water moving at 60 miles per hour, hundreds of feet deep, scouring bedrock. Wooded bedrock. Where did this water come from? He suggests the Younger Dryas impact melted portions of the ice sheet so rapidly that the water volume exceeded anything previously imagined. The Grand Canyon itself, officially carved by the Colorado River over millions of years, shows the signatures of catastrophic drainage, a massive body of water breaching a natural dam and carving the canyon in a geological instant. Ice core data from Greenland and Antarctica show rapid climate shifts at the Younger Dryas boundary, with temperature swings of 15 to 20 degrees in less than a decade. This is not gradual climate change. This is chaos, triggered by enormous volumes of freshwater dumping into the oceans, disrupting currents. Meltwater Pulse 1A, around 14,600 years ago, saw sea levels rise 50 feet in less than 500 years. Meltwater Pulse 1B happened around 11,300 years ago, another rapid jump. If you were a coastal civilization during these pulses, your world ended. Everything you knew was gone. The black matte layer across North America is the physical signature of the Younger Dryas impact, a dark band containing charcoal, nanodiamonds and magnetic spherules. Below it you find megafauna fossils and Clovis artifacts. Above it, nothing. The rocks do not lie. They tell a story of catastrophe, of violent change, of flooding on scales that dwarf anything in recorded history, and it matches point for point what every ancient culture said happened. The myths were not made up, they were remembered. Because the rocks remember too. What if the ancient texts are not mythology at all, but historical documents? Eyewitness testimony, distorted by time and translation, but fundamentally describing real events. Plato's account of Atlantis is the most famous example. He explicitly states it is not fiction, that the story came from Egyptian priests who had preserved ancient records. They gave him a specific date for Atlantis's destruction, 9,000 years before his time, placing it around 9,600 BCE, right at the Younger Dryas boundary, when sea levels surged. They gave him geographic details: an island beyond the Pillars of Hercules, with a concentric ring structure. This is not vague allegory. This is a description. The Sumerian king list describes rulers who reigned for tens of thousands of years before the flood. After the flood, reign lengths dropped to normal human lifespans. Mainstream historians dismiss the pre-flood section as mythological, but the key detail is the flood itself. The king list explicitly marks a cataclysmic break in their timeline. The Book of Enoch, removed from the Bible, describes the Watchers, angelic beings who descended to earth, taught humans forbidden knowledge like astronomy and metallurgy, and interbred with women, creating the Nephilim giants. God, angered by this corruption, sent the flood to cleanse the earth. Strip away the religious interpretation, and you have a description of knowledge transfer and a catastrophic flood that destroyed the world that existed before. The Mahabharata from India contains descriptions that sound disturbingly like nuclear war. Weapons that create pillars of smoke, incinerate armies, and leave survivors with symptoms of radiation poisoning. The Popol Vuh from the Maya describes the world being created and destroyed multiple times by flood, fire, and storms. It mentions resin falling from the sky, matching impact debris, and total darkness for extended periods, matching an impact winter. Egyptian texts from the Temple of Edfu speak of a first time, Zep Tepi, when an island of creation was destroyed and survivor gods came to Egypt to re-establish civilization. Even the Bible describes repeated catastrophes: Noah's flood, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah by fire from heaven. These are not just moral tales, they are descriptions of cosmic and environmental disasters. Ancient people were not primitive storytellers. They lived through events we can barely imagine, and they tried desperately to record what happened. They carved it in stone, wrote it on papyrus, and passed it down for thousands of years. Modern academia dismisses their testimony as myth. But when the mythology from every culture describes the same events, when the texts match the geological evidence, and when the dates align with climate catastrophes we can now prove happened, maybe it is time to stop calling them myths. Maybe it is time to call them what they are: history. The ancients witnessed the end of their world. They survived. They recorded what they saw, and they have been trying to tell us ever since. We just were not listening. So where does all of this leave us? The myths from every culture describe the same global disaster because they experienced the same disaster. It was not mythology, it was memory. The evidence is overwhelming. Geological proof of catastrophic flooding, ice core data showing rapid climate shifts, the confirmed Younger Dryas impact, impossible structures like Göbekli Tepe, underwater ruins, the sudden extinction of megafauna, and astronomical alignments, all pointing to a specific time 12,000 years ago. This is not coincidence. This is evidence of a real event that nearly ended our species. We are a civilization with amnesia. We have forgotten that there was something before, a sophisticated advanced civilization that existed on the coastlines before the waters rose. When that civilization was destroyed, survivors scattered across the world, carrying fragments of knowledge. They became the mysterious teachers in every culture's founding myths: the Apkallu, the Shemsu Hor, Viracocha, Quetzalcoatl. They were not gods. They were refugees. The establishment refuses to admit this because it requires rewriting everything. So they resist, they attack, they suppress. But the truth does not care about academic consensus. The truth exists in the rocks, the ruins, and the myths that have been trying to tell us what happened for 12,000 years. And here is the part that should terrify you: it can happen again. The Taurid Meteor stream is still out there. the debris field that struck us before still crosses Earth's orbit. We are entering a period where encounters are more likely, and we are not prepared. The ancients understood this. They built monuments to track the sky. They encoded warnings in stone. They were trying to give us a chance, and we ignored them, calling their warnings mythology. We are about to find out if that was a mistake, but there are things you can do. First, educate yourself. Dig into the primary sources, read the research, and think for yourself. The information is out there. Second, spread awareness. The more people who understand that human history is not what we have been told, the harder it becomes for the establishment to maintain the old story. Third, look up. Pay attention to the sky. The ancients watched the heavens obsessively for a reason. History is not settled. The past is not known. We are still discovering who we are and where we came from. And the more we discover, the stranger and more fascinating our story becomes. The ancients left us a message, carved in stone and preserved in myth. The message is simple. Remember what happened. Watch for the return. Prepare, because the destroyer is still out there. And cycles, by their very nature, always complete.